Forged secretly in mortuary archaeology's hottest furnace, it's Archaeo-Death.
Hey, Archeo Deathlings, and this week we're going to address The Dig. This is the new Netflix film which has taken the world of archaeology by storm and has received a wide-ranging popular reception. I want to just give you some of my feelings about it as a professor of early medieval archaeology and mortuary archaeology, because it shows the Anglo-Saxon archaeology of the 1939 excavations at Sutton Hoo, and because it is about a discovery of a tomb, the richest burial from English soil, an early 7th century ship burial with a burial chamber within it, containing regalia, feasting gear, martial gear, and other items linked to a high status, princely, perhaps even royal burial of the East Anglian kingdom. And for those reasons, I think it's a really important moment for reflecting on the representation of archaeologists, archaeology, and in particular the story of early Anglo-Saxon England. And in those regards, I have already written 6 blog posts about it, and I want to just quickly review those and give you some overall impressions. Now, my blog posts have dealt with the representation of the archaeologists, which has been the focus of some criticism, and I'm not particularly happy with how archaeologists themselves are portrayed, but overall it's a very positive story about this famous discovery, fictionalised, conflated, condensed, but otherwise telling a really powerful yarn with some great performances by Ray Fiennes and Carey Mulligan and the other supporting actors. The story is very much focused on discovery, not of the treasure itself, but on the people involved and the relatively minor conflict as the Second World War hoves into view. So that was my first blog post, called The Dig, Sutton Hoo on Film. I then did a more critical, sort of nerdy evaluation of the burial mounds, and I did make the argument that, and the landscape, and I did make the argument that the landscape is a key actor itself in the storyline of The Dig, and that the Suffolk landscape, the immediate impending war landscape, is evocative and central, and the representation of the burial mounds too. But I did have some qualifying criticisms, just as I had criticisms of the ages and behaviours of the archaeologists not being true to what may have happened. And of course we're looking at the conflation of 2 seasons of excavations by Basil Brown in 1938 and 1939. Likewise, I thought that the landscape had many positive aspects, showing relationship with the river, a railway line, a town and a museum at Ipswich, that it also showed the relationship with the parish church at Sutton, where Edith Pretty goes to her husband's grave, the flyovers of aircraft, giving that sense of impending war. But I did make clear that it's very odd that there's no animals. That the relationship with the river is shown a little bit confused and inaccurately. That the topography of the princely burial site is all wrong. For anyone who's visited the unique site of Sutton Hoo, its topography is absolutely key to understanding both the early Anglo-Saxon funerary rituals, but also the relationship of Edith Pretty's house to the estate and to the burial mounds, and why she was captivated with them, and the inability of them to show the intervisibility of her house with the mounds is I think a bit of a problem. The orientation's all wrong, and the burial mounds themselves are represented as too big. They're just too big, and Brown being buried alive didn't happen, and it certainly wouldn't have happened with the scale of the mounds that he was excavating. They elevated the mounds that he was investigating in 1938 by about 4 or 5 foot, about 8-9 foot from about the sort of 5 foot that they were, and likewise I think the scale, the diameter of the mound one is about right, but they've made it much bigger than it actually is to give that, to over dramatize it for the film. The dig itself is shown very well, and there's been some critical comments of different aspects, but I think this is the first time ever we've had an attempt to show a real historical excavation, an archaeological excavation taking place. There's nothing like it, so my quibbly points aside, it's brilliant. So that was my second blog post. My third blog post really reflected on the mortuary aspect, that the film very much sees this about relationship between Edith Pretty and Basil Brown, and their shared, almost spiritual and significance they afford to a burial of a warrior or king as they see it, and their responsibility that they share to tell that story and to make sure that story is well told to the nation. I think there's lessons. I'm not saying that's accurate for how they were motivated, but in terms of the storyline, it speaks to our 21st century responsible desires to only investigate graves when there's a story to tell that benefits us and benefits the future. And so while it's a romanticized portrayal of the underdog amateur fighting against the museum and the experts, all of the excavators, all of the archaeologists were there very much in an amateur capacity, trying to salvage a ship against impending war against, and it was a problem created by Brown and Pretty, so one could blame them more and exonerate the other archaeologists much more than is shown in the film. But I make the point that the story portrayed to us is one not about treasure hunting, but about engaging with the story of an early Anglo-Saxon king or warrior as portrayed, and feeling that these artifacts need to be on display to the public. So we see a really positive story showing you that context matters, although I wish they'd shown a little bit more context to the burial mounds, and the relationship between the living and the dead and the future. So it's about past, present, future, and the chain linking them all together that Brown is shown to be passionate about and Edith Pretty is shown to be passionate about. And so my first three blogs are to make the point that this film is a really amazing and responsible representation of early mid-20th century archaeology. It pulls some punches, there's no real bad guy, but I think it really does an important job in communicating archaeology, the story of Sutton Hoo, but also the broader story of why archaeology matters in the 21st century. And at a time when archaeology is under threat from government funding being pulled, by the economic challenges we're all facing with Brexit and the pandemic, this is a time where we can really see it reflected in this 1939 world, a time where we're not sure what's going to be coming in the future, of mass death, of a time where we reconnect with who we are and where we come from. And in that sense, while I would be critical perhaps of some of the nationalistic romance of it, and there is also a very positive story to tell about the power of archaeology to connect us to pasts and to futures. And in that sense, I'm very supportive of the film. Now, beyond that, I've also talked about how this story has been communicated in the media, and I've been participant in some of that. So I think the story has been incredibly well received by film critics, but also by audiences and by archaeologists, although they have some beef with the representation of some of the characters, particularly Penny Piggott. And I've made clear, though, in my fourth blog post, as I was asked by Esther Adley of The Guardian to comment on the film's reception, I did make the point very clearly that this is a time where this is a time when we need these positive stories. When the pandemic is hopefully past, people will want to go back to Sutton Hoo, back to the British Museum, so the National Trust site at Sutton Hoo, the British Museum, and also to reconnect with the earlier Anglo-Saxon period, because it's an exciting period for understanding about the heritage of these islands and about stories of diaspora and global as well as European and Northwest European Scandinavian connections that our past harbours. So it's not an insular story, it's a very broad-ranging story. So I think this is a moment we should perhaps join forces on to promote the study of the centuries from the end of Rome, sort of in the West, particularly the end of the 4th, early 5th century, and then through the late 5th, 6th, 7th centuries. This is really exciting archaeology, and it's a time we should be telling it in a positive and engaging way to new audiences. And I followed this up. I was asked, as rarely happens, and it's a bit frustrating that my own research wasn't the focus of interest in Sutton, because I have done research about Sutton Hoo, but I was approached by for a fifth blog post. I just reflected on the fact I was approached by Owen Jarvis for Life Science, who was writing an article called "Who Was Buried at Sutton Hoo." I should mention that the fourth blog post about the Guardian piece. I meant to mention that the title of Esther Adler's piece is fantastic. It's called "Out of the Dark Ages." Netflix film The Dig ignites ballyhoo about Sutton Hoo. So I'm very proud for that reason alone to be quoted in her wonderful article. But then yes, Owen Jarvis for Life Science was asking who was buried at Sutton Hoo, and it's actually a really useful piece because Jarvis actually reviews a lot of the key experts, including Professor Barbara York, Dr. Alex Wolff, a range of individuals who have been commentators and writers about Sutton Hoo, about what they think about the identity of the occupant of Mound 1. And like Dr. Sue Brunning, who closes the piece, this is not the key question for me. There are other exciting questions, but I'm pleased I was asked, and I did put in my little some of my comments, and my blog post actually I actually record all the rest of the things I had to say about that. And then the reason why I won't go on any longer on this YouTube channel is I was interviewed by Rosie at History A podcast, and I've now recorded almost a 1.5 hour, 1 hour 40 minute double-parted, double-sectioned podcast about the dig at Sutton Hoo, and then my feelings about the film and its reception. So my Archaeodeath blog now has 6 blog posts about this Sutton Hoo and The Dig, the film, and while I have criticisms, I want to reiterate that again it's been very positively received, and as you can see on the shelf behind me, British Archaeology magazine contains a special discussion of Mike Pitts with the director and others about the film and how it represents Sutton Hoo. You can access journal articles freely available through the journal Antiquity, including the original report by Charles Phillips and others from 1940s Antiquity. There's lots of resources out there. There's blog posts by Dr. Sue Brunning, and I've been amazed by some of the YouTube videos and TikTok videos created by creators such as Dr. Chloe Duckworth, Natasha Bilson, and also Dig It with Raven, who have done really good jobs at synopsising the archaeology behind the TV show. So this has created a real swell of popular and positive engagement with not only Sutton Hoo and The Dig film, but also early Anglo-Saxon England, and it's part of a broader story of these islands and its many connections during the late Roman period, the late Antique period, and the early Anglo-Saxon period, these different overlapping period terminologies. So I hope you look at my blog posts. I hope you look at some of the other content produced, including Dr. Sue Brunning's blog and her video about the Sutton Hoo helmet, which is on this channel. There's lots of really great commentators about Sutton Hoo, and it's a really positive moment at a time when we direly need it to engage people with the exciting story of these enigmatic burial mounds. Those that have been excavated, many of them robbed, but we have Mound 17, Mound 1, we have 2 intact burial deposits, as well as other disturbed graves that have been found, and their broader landscape context. So the story of Sutton Hoo is something I've actively addressed in my own research through multiple publications, but it's a really great, I'm proud and pleased to have found time to contribute to this moment where we've had this film release sparking so much interest in the early Middle Ages.
If you've enjoyed this Archaeodeath video, why not check out the Archaeodeath blog at howardwilliamsblog.wordpress.com.